very frustrating, to say the least, story to cover here, and we might as well jump right into it. And this is the story that you mentioned in the news brief about the killer of Iryna Zarutska, which is a story you and I have been following. It really struck both of us pretty hard. And this happened, I think, just days, if not weeks, before the killing of Charlie Kirk last year. Right. And it kind of was an example of just how far we've sunk in this country. And this was this crazed homeless man who is on video. I know we legally would have to say alleged or accused killer. He's on video stabbing Iryna Zarutska to death on this train. He should have been, at the very least, in custody somewhere because of his many previous crimes, and yet was allowed to be out in the street and killed this young Ukrainian refugee who was really doing her part to try and be a good example as a refugee here in the country. She wasn't just some moocher who just came to the country, to try and get advantages. She did seem to be doing her best to be a good guest of our nation. That's why she was riding public transport, and she was killed by this homeless man who now has been found, quote unquote, incompetent to stand trial due to insanity.
It's so frustrating. And for those who aren't sure which one we're talking about, this is the one where you have a large black man who stands up on the CCTV footage on this rail train, and he goes up to the young white woman who's like blonde, and because she's Ukrainian, and he stabs her in the throat several times, and then walks away. And then we watch as she's in terror, and she basically just dies alone. And then eventually some people come over to her, but it's way too late, and she's just there in a pool of blood. And it caused a lot of outrage, rightly so. And then later on, as this supposedly insane man, not evil man, which I think is a distinction there that I would make, then announced that he had killed that white woman.
Yes.
Lest we think that this was not a racial crime.
Yes, there was a clear motivation there to just cause some kind of terror to this person because of her race on this man's part. Right.
So he targeted the person who was particularly vulnerable. So there's an act of, I don't know, of will, or of you could say of reason. Even if it's evil, it's still, well reasoned. This is the vulnerable person who I can attack. And then he announces what he did and his reasoning for doing so, to the rest of the train. So the argument that he's incompetent to stand trial doesn't really sit well with me. And then you have to go, okay, so this whole thing of incompetency, the argument that we're making here, what does that say? Like, okay, so the person is forever unable to rejoin society. At least I would say so. Like, whether you want to say that this is evil or whether you want to say that it's insane, this person should not be out on the streets ever again.
Yes.
However, that happens. But what we're increasingly seeing are these cases where the person is ruled to be mentally ill, and in fact, they're actually, in a lot of these cases, just straight up evil. They're ruled to be mentally ill, and so they go into this psychiatric facility until they're quote unquote cured, and then we keep seeing cases in which they get released, and the cycle continues. And this is already someone who repeatedly was released from the justice system, and she is the victim of that. Like, this is absolutely atrocious. Honestly, I don't understand why we got rid of the death penalty as it relates to some of these cases, because this is a person who is not fit to be around anybody, nor will he ever be fit to be around anybody. I realize that the church has said that it's that it wants to lean away from that in cases where we can safely incarcerate people long term. Whether you can with somebody who's this dangerous, it's difficult to say, because you saw someone there who was not provoked. There was no provocation. He was just sitting there, on a train, surrounded by people who weren't talking to him, weren't doing anything to him, weren't even looking at him, and his decision was to stand over the top of this woman and then repeatedly stab her in the throat while she was defenseless.
Rise Right exists to help you rise right. To start your morning with faith and reason, so you can handle whatever the day throws at you with a firm foundation in Catholic truth and hope. But we can only do this with the aid of listeners like you. Help support this mission at thestationofthecross.com. That's thestationofthecross.com.
There's just a total, I think, inversion of priorities here when it comes to justice and how to keep a society safe and keep people in that society safe. And if you want to talk about the rights of migrants and the rights of those who are vulnerable, Iryna is an exact case because she's someone who fled from a war-torn country and came to the U.S. and was admitted here as essentially a guest, if you want to frame it that way, because of her situation that she was fleeing from. And if that is something that you really do prioritize, especially in regards to the immigration discussion debate that we have nowadays, that is someone who has one of the most clearest cut cases for someone to be protected and looked out for as someone who legitimately sought refuge and was doing, again, her part to try and follow the laws of whether she could be driving or instead be taking public transportation because she doesn't have the right documentation, that sort of thing. Again, that's why she was on a train, as I think you've mentioned in the past, Sarah, as a part of our covering of this story as these things have come up. And yet, of course, it's the killer that gets this consideration of, oh, well, he doesn't understand what he's standing trial for. Well, then why was he out on the street in the first place if he was incompetent to even understand that he shouldn't be murdering random people on a bus? It's atrocious, and it's part of. This is not an isolated case. We see this. We see similar stories come up constantly, and Iryna is a figurehead for this. Not the least because of the dramatic video of this horrible event. It's one of these things where, in a lot of ways, I say that you should see the video so that you can see the direct consequences of this, the direct consequences of what happens when activist judges let these kinds of people out on bail or out without even having them on bail just to roam the streets.
He was on cashless bail when he stabbed her.
Yes, it's such a vivid thing, but it is horribly disturbing. I also can't recommend that you go and seek this out and watch it because it is horrifying.
That's the trouble nowadays. I think we see so many acts of violence that we actually become a little bit immune to the effect that we would have had, in an earlier generation, because we didn't used to see people constantly dying as we scroll through social media.
Yeah, it's really horrifying.
But the case is so vivid. And I will just say, in so many cases, like this particular man, we hear that it's really not his fault because he experienced this hardship in his early life or whatever. This is one of the most common themes we hear about those who go through the justice system. But you look at Iryna Zarutska, and she had to flee not just her home, but her entire country. Came here, didn't break any crimes, went through the difficulties of public transportation in the United States because we don't have, except in places like Washington, D.C., we do not have a good infrastructure for that. She went through it even though she's there surrounded by, generally speaking, people who are not the best. Right? That's why a lot of people avoid public transportation in cities like Charlotte. She's doing it all the right way. And she's not committing these things despite her hardship, because hardship isn't an excuse for injuring other people and committing moral reprehensible crimes. We use it because we want to blame crime and not criminals, and that's a real problem in our society today in the way that we talk about these things. And it has a human cost. It has a human cost in the cases of people like Iryna Zarutska, but also her family, who have seen and watched her die, and that's going to be a part of their lives forever. And also, the loss of whoever she would have created, right? The children she would have had, the bloodline that she would have created, that she had a right to engage in, and all of that was sort of ripped away from her. There's so much evil and so much frustration in this case, Jake.